Welcome. All about mobile market research and why we should be using it. So a little bit about the agenda. I'm going to start off with some context, and those of you who happen to notice that in the reminder there was an invitation to a survey. I hope you've had a chance to do that survey. If not, you're going to see the link again in a moment, and I'd encourage you just to go and visit it. Then some other bits and pieces about the context for mobile market research. Then we're going to look at Quant and Qual and look at how mobile is currently being used. Then we're going to consider some of the issues around passive data collection, location-based research, a little bit about the cutting edge of mobile. Not that if you're attending a 101 course you should be jumping straight to the cutting edge, but it's useful to know where the cutting edge is. And ethics. Really important topic. We need to look at what are the key issues and what are the challenges, and then we'll move into that Q&A phase. So a couple of days ago I put up on Twitter and in LinkedIn a link to a survey. It's in the email reminder. This is the link if you want to type it in. I've used a bit.ly so it's a little bit easier for you to type in. I should make the point, I should have made it even more clearly, that this is not a good survey. This is a survey designed to show some of the issues that occur when some of your respondents or your research participants are taking the survey on a PC, some are taking it on a tablet, and some are taking it on a mobile. So at the time I looked about an hour ago, 45 minutes ago, we'd got 42 people who had completed the survey. There's about 91 people online, so maybe getting on for half of you did it, although we're not sure there's a complete overlap, of course. 28 completes, 14 partials. I'm going to come back to that feature in a moment. First question in the survey was what device you're using, and just over half the people who took the survey were using a smartphone. Interestingly enough, when I looked at this morning, it was about 75% smartphone. So the people who answered quicker and the people who answered out of work hours were more likely to be smartphone. That is something that we see with consumer data and B2B data in live studies. Also, to give me an idea of what sort of people are taking the study, and I'm just looking here. Okay, the sound is a bit quiet, so I'm moving that up, and the bit.ly didn't work for everybody. If you go to the newmr.org page, there is a link to that survey. If you click on that link, that will also take you into the survey. So back to the broadcast, and I'm going to try to speak up a bit for those who are finding it quiet. Also, of course, turn up the volume. Turn me to 11 if you can. So, surveys in the last year. This was to give a little bit of background as to who is taking part. Most people have done an online survey in the last year. There's still CATI going on. There's still face-to-face going on. Mobile apps, that is higher than average. It probably reflects that people who are interested in this topic are more likely to be early adopters. And we have a couple of people who are not actually involved in the surveys process, either because they're in maybe qualitative research or, of course, that they're not in the survey research part of our industry. I think this is really quite a nice, cute way of showing this. One of the questions in there was, what percentage of online surveys do you think will be completed via mobile device in 2020? And what we can see here is that there is a really big variation. There is a bit of a bunching around 60 and 70%. There are some people up in the 80%. Couple of people down there who think it will be 20%. So even when we're talking to our colleagues, there is a wide dispersion of views, and I think that is quite interesting. This is looking at the dropout amongst those 42 people. So on the first question, what device are you using? It was a single pick, it was a forced question. All 42 people completed that question. What types of survey are you involved in? Well, that was a multi-pick. On the PC, that appeared on the same page as it appeared as the previous question. On smartphones, it will have appeared on the following page. It's one of those differences we get when we move from PC to smartphone. One person didn't answer that question. Favorite sports team, a short, open, forced. we have a big drop down to 33. This is not unusual when you start to ask people things in. Maybe they can't work out type it in. Maybe they're trying to do that survey on their smartphone when they're moving. Maybe they can't be bothered. There are a variety of reasons. The second question, why is that your favorite sports team? This was a long open, a bigger box for it, on the PC on the same page, on the smartphone on the next page, and a little bit of a drop off, partly because it wasn't forced, I would imagine. The next question was a slider, and sliders are really popular in the research industry on PCs. They look fabulous on tablets. They can be a real problem on smartphones. They look very small, they require more dexterity. Quite a few systems, as I will talk about, will render them differently on a smartphone. They may render them as type this number in, as opposed to being the slider. And we see a drop off again down to 25. The next question, which was on the PC on the same page, on the mobile on the next page, was asking people to type in 4 numbers that add up to 71. This was really just to illustrate the sort of problems you get, particularly if the boxes don't all fit on the same page and they're adding up to some sort of arbitrary number. Although we got 26 for that compared with the slider, which kind of reminds us that the slider could be problematic. And then we get to the final comments, and we're asking people, how do you think the device you used impacted the survey, and some various thoughts about it. And a lot of people who reached the end of the survey filled in those final comments. So just looking at some of those final comments now, typed in less open ends. Wouldn't have taken if it weren't on a smartphone, as that is where I access Twitter. So we've got multiple things going on here which are so typical about mobile research. Yes, I typed in fewer open ends, but I wouldn't have taken the study if it wasn't on my smartphone, and I linked to it via Twitter. Easy to press the buttons. I don't know if anybody, those of you who have taken it, noticed, but the whole area around the buttons counts as a button. It wasn't just the button itself. Hard to type much. I've kept the answers shorter. This is something we see a lot of the time, except when you're interviewing millennials who seem really much more comfortable on their mobiles. Easier to commit to answering the survey, but had to scroll down a bit to hit next, which was slightly annoying. So we're seeing this win and loss situation. Slider scale percentage, a bit small to read, and giddy to slide from the back of a wobbly cab. I can understand that. Opening in browser within LinkedIn iPhone app meant that the next button was stuck off the bottom of the screen, so I had to reopen in Safari. Otherwise, like it. It didn't really impact on how I did the survey. It was one person's, another person said overall good. Here's another one. Terrible survey. Won't be attending the webinar because of it. And this person was the first one so far that we've seen who was answering it on a PC. I guess I didn't quite get the message across. This wasn't a live survey. This was about exploring people's experiences. And then another one from somebody who used tablet. Will type less on my tablet's touchpad. But they're still using the possessive apostrophe in tablets, which is good to see. And there's a lot of variety in how people are doing those sorts of things. Annoying, even with a good BlackBerry keyboard. Remember, there are a lot of devices out there that people are using. So we're now really going to go without a safety net and just have a look at the live data and hope that it comes through. Oh, let's log back in. And go to reports and scroll down. Apologies for that. I'd left it logged out too long. So refresh the report so we get all of those latest responses. If we just scroll down, then we're up to 64 responses from 42, and those PC responses have really jumped up because a lot of you are sitting there presumably looking at this broadcast on your PC or your Mac or your laptop, as opposed to looking at it on your smartphone. I'd encourage you to have another go at the survey later on and just have a look at it on a different device and see how you get on. So let's just scroll down a little bit more. And yeah, again, we see about half of you have used surveys using mobile apps. That is much higher than typical in the industry. but about a third are doing face-to-face surveys. And I think we need to remember that as an industry, because people are joining this webinar from all over the world. Everywhere is not the same as London or Manhattan. And finally, where do people think we're going to be in 2020? That's pretty close to a bell curve, with a few people down the bottom who are much more disenchanted with where it is, and an average of 66%. Now, I'm going to do some more analysis of that data tomorrow. So if you've not had a chance to put in your thoughts and have a play with it, please do. And please make sure that you put something useful in those final comments, because that is a great way of sharing insight about the process. So back to the main substance of the presentation. What do we mean by mobile? We often use the term mobile device. And until recently, a mobile device was a mobile phone. We've got this term smartphone, and we mostly mean iPhones and Android phones, so the Samsungs, the HTCs. We can't know what we mean, even though it's really hard to put a precise definition. There's also the Nokia Microsoft machines, there's also the BlackBerry machines. We then have this term feature phone. Almost nobody in the world says, I have got a feature phone. Please do not, when you're doing a survey, ask people to define their type of phone as feature phone, smartphone. Feature phone is a retrofit term. We needed to distinguish between smartphones and feature phones. So phones that are not smartphones are feature phones. If you are doing mobile research in Indonesia or in large parts of Africa, you are likely to be dealing with feature phones. You may be using USSD, you may be using SMS, you're going to be using more challenging systems. Some people have split that feature phone definition even further. They will talk about phones that use the internet and have a browser but are not smartphones are feature phones, and phones that do not use the internet are dumb phones. So if somebody and they say we are going to be using feature phones, just ask them, well, what do you mean by feature, so that you're both coming off the same understanding. We then have tablets, and of course tablets have got the large tablets and the small tablets, so there's quite a lot of variety going on there. And then we have this thing was incredibly hot topic last year, the phablet, which is a phone that's as big as a small tablet. And these are incredibly popular in some places. You go to Shanghai, you see a lot of people with a phone nearly as big as their head, and they can do masses and masses of things on it. You go to somewhere like Tokyo, and you see phones are actually really quite small. So it's different in different parts of the world. It's very hard to generalize about what sort of experience people are going to have. Why is mobile so important? Well, first of all, the ubiquity. Something like 70% of the world's population have got a mobile phone. Increasingly smartphones. In UK, USA, the developed economies, it's over 60% of adults have smartphones. In places like Korea and Singapore, it is South Korea, it is much, much higher. So the world is becoming increasingly smartphone oriented. And we always have those phones with us. We have them in the bathroom, we have them in the bedroom. If we want to take part in something, if we want to take a picture of something, that phone is going to be there with us. There's also a global drift away from PC to tablet. So thinking PC is becoming less and less relevant. More and more people do not own a personal computer. They have a tablet, they have a phone, they don't necessarily need a personal computer. In the moment research, I'm going to come back to this, but this is a really hot topic. People are realizing that there's so much more we can find out, that we can understand, if we can get people to communicate with us in the moment while they're buying something, just after they've eaten it, during their journey, whatever that is. Participative research, where we're enlisting the research participants to be collaborators. We're asking them to actively take photographs, to record things, to enter diary entries, really changing the nature and the whole paradigm of research. There's been a lot of criticism, particularly from the behavioral economists and others, about relying on recall and opinion. Mobile is opening up more and more possibilities to collect behavioral data. What did people do? How long did they watch it? Where did they do it? Who did they do it with? And that's another great prospect opened up by mobile. Multimedia. We've been able to show multimedia for a long time, but mobile opens up the opportunity to collect photographs, to collect video, to collect voice in new and exciting ways. But the biggest, most important reason is because many research participants insist on using their mobile device. There are some companies that are still trying to hear everything. There are some companies who are still trying to exclude mobile users. That really is a dead end. Many people are trying very, very hard to use their mobile because that's how they want to do it, and we need to work with them. About 30% of online surveys attempted by people using mobile devices. Mobile is already here. People used to talk about when is mobile going to arrive. I used to talk about when is mobile going to arrive. It arrived sometime around 2013, 2014. We're now seeing starts, and I say starts as opposed to completes for a reason, are increasingly coming from mobile devices. However, when people have looked at this, they're finding that only about a quarter of studies are mobile friendly. So we've got masses of people trying to take all surveys using their mobile device, and we've got lots and lots of surveys that are not mobile friendly, mobile optimized, or device agnostic. In the world of CATI, it used to be the case that people with mobiles were excluded. That turned out in the Western markets. In the developing markets, mobiles have always been an important part of CATI. But in the Western markets, we used to exclude them because of costs. However, the growth in mobile-only households meant that that was impossible. Across lots and lots of organizations, 30 to 50% of all CATI interviews are now via mobile. Probably the best surveys that are done in the United States are done by Pew. Lots and lots of rigor and random access and all sorts of things. They are now targeting 65% of their completes to be from mobile phones, which is up from 25% in just 2008. Increasingly, we're seeing tablets and mobiles are becoming the devices of choices for CAPI, and we're going to talk about that a bit more. So in the pre-webinar survey, 67% was the estimate that you came up with for how many surveys are soon going to be taken. I think most people now agree that very soon the majority of online surveys will be taken from mobile devices. We have to be ready for that. You really don't get to choose about mobile. People are taking our surveys using mobile, even if the survey is rubbish on mobile. Even if we ask them not to. So you send an email out and you say, please do not take this on your mobile, and then you look at the screen size and you look at the operating system and you see that actually, no, it wasn't there. And in some cases, even when we try to detect that they've got a mobile, they manage to slip through. Is it our job to fight research participants, or is it our job to help them? And by the way, that's a rhetorical question. It's our job to help them. We have enough people who do not want to take part in market research. Apps. This is one of the more complex areas for some people. An app is a bit of software downloaded onto your mobile device. Most of us are familiar with games and maps and books and calculators, and even the little app that turns your mobile phone into a really expensive torch. But there's also research apps. Ideally, they come down from really creditable places where people trust them, like app stores and so on. Research apps include surveys, not surprisingly. There are lots and lots of Qual, so mobile diaries, mobile ethnography, some really exciting stuff in the Qual research area, and lots of things about passive data collection, and we've got some more on that in a few minutes. What are the positive things about apps? Well, one of them is that they will work, some of them will work even if you do not have access to the internet. So that is a really big positive. You can use them outside of the Wi-Fi zone. You can use them even with people who don't have good, reliable internet access. You can use them inside buildings where there isn't any internet access to do CAPI type interviews. Apps can also access more of the phone's features. There are some limits, particularly on the iPhone, about what they can access, but they can access the camera, the video, the sensors, the locations, and so on, with permission, ideally, legally and ethically with permission. And they can do push notification. So we can set up a survey so at 8 o'clock in the morning, it will ask you, what are you doing now? It can spontaneously ask you at different times. It can ask you when a certain Wi-Fi zone comes into range. It can ask you to do a survey when an iBeacon comes into range. That's what we mean by push notification. It isn't dependent on you downloading an email or receiving an SMS to say there's a survey. It can actually initiate the activity. What are the negatives about apps? It's got to be downloaded onto your device, and that raises technical issues. People are not always competent in how to download it. It may not be written well for all the various types of devices that people are using. And then there's respondent reluctance. People in a wide range of research on research studies have shown themselves to be much less liable to download an app than just to do a survey through their browser. So we need to work out ways of getting around that respondent reluctance. The people who have done best at doing that are the panel companies and people who are running MROCs and insight communities, because they have a relationship with people and people have a desire to take part. Of course, there's also the cost implication. You've got to write them for the different devices and for the different operating systems, and in some cases for the different generations of the operating systems, for the KitKats and the Jelly Beans and so on of Android. So it becomes a bit of a balance between the two. The mobile browser, it's really easy for the researcher and the software provider, but it's more limited in what it can do. At the moment, the vast majority of surveys are conducted via browsers. Some are conducted via apps, but the vast majority of surveys are done via browsers. Apps, more powerful, but they're harder to implement. You've got to get more permission, you've got to provide more support, you've got to get them written and so on. Most geo-related work, so geo-tracking, geolocation, geofencing, most in-the-moment research, and most push research is done via an app. So pretty much all of the cutting edge, all of the really sexy stuff is done by apps. But the majority of stuff is done via the mobile browser. So what about a scorecard for those surveys? It's slightly slower to create the mobile survey because you've got to test it on more things. It's getting easier and easier. The software platforms are doing a great job at making it easier. It's slightly more expensive because there are fewer sample options, but that is changing, and it's slightly more expensive because there's slightly more testing to do. There's pressure to use shorter surveys. When I talk to clients, one of the reasons they don't want to take part in mobile research is they don't want to give up on their 40-minute really boring tracker because they know they shouldn't be doing that on mobile. They probably, in fact not more probably, they definitely shouldn't be doing that online either. But this reluctance to use shorter surveys is one of the pressures with mobile surveys. There is less research on what works. There's a growing amount. Every conference now seems to have some new studies. There are plenty of published papers, but there's still less information on what works on mobile. The sample frame is often different. If you do a study on and look at the difference between people who did the survey on their mobile and the people who did the survey on a PC, there are sample differences. The sample for the mobile will tend to be younger, they will tend to be more executive. In the United States, for example, they are more likely to be Hispanic than the PC sample. Now, all of those things are actually good, but they are a difference. They bring in a complexity. Sometimes the same questions give different results, not because different people are answering, but simply because the question looks different. The multi-select grid is one that looks very different between most mobiles and most PCs, and it gives you different answers. So that is an issue for us to confront. What are the positives? You get your responses faster. Remember I mentioned that in the early part of that test survey that we ran, more of the data were coming from mobile. That is typical. You get responses really quickly because it comes through to where most people pick up their mail now, or their notifications, or their internet messaging, and it comes up on their mobile. They take it on the mobile. You get that information back faster. The flip side of the sample frame difference is we're reaching people who would not have done that PC survey. That is really important. It's one of the main reasons for enabling mobile surveys. Most questions do seem to give the same answers. Now, we don't have a definitive answer on that yet, but we are going to get there, and we're going to keep researching those issues. So it's great news so far that most of the time we seem to be getting similar answers. The information can be more accurate. If you're asking people how many windows they've got in their house and they're at home, they can go around and have a look. If you're asking them various other questions, because it's mobile enabled, if it's in the moment, if it's when they're actually buying something, if it's when they've just come out of the restaurant, then you're going to get more accurate data. The data can include more information. We can have location. Where were they when they did the study? What about video? What about photographs? All of these sorts of things. So we're getting more data, more variety. Interestingly enough, most mobile surveys at the moment are completed in home or the office. So even though we're making it more convenient for people, it tends to be home or office. That could well change as we move forward. So, some advice about online surveys. Long surveys are a bad idea, and they're a bad idea on PCs too. This is perhaps a little bit more contentious. If you've got something that doesn't work on a mobile, your options are stop mobile respondents from taking part. Generally a bad thing. I'm going to come back to that in a moment because sometimes you have to do it. Have bad data. Generally a bad thing. Choose a design that does work on mobile. Well, that's usually the best option. So we almost have to think hard about what cases would not be mobile. So let's say we're doing magazine copy testing and we need to use a page turner as part of the survey device. Well, a large screen tablet is fine and a PC is fine, but if we're trying to say what does the page look like when you view it in real size, then we're not going to get a good experience on the smartphone. So that is one of the cases where we wouldn't do it. If we're getting people to press their fingers on the screen as the video is playing in order to record various things, that will often not be a great option on a smartphone. Long videos are not a great option on a smartphone. So there will be a few times when you need to do option A, which is apologize to the research participants, explain why it has to be a PC, and then check that it actually is a PC and check that they can take part meaningfully. Test all surveys on your smartphone. So you, as an individual person, take responsibility for every survey you run or you're involved in from now on. Personally, just have a look at it on your smartphone. There should be some formal process going on. Somebody should be checking this properly. They should be using simulators and things like this, but just personally take responsibility and test it on your smartphone. You need to use shorter questions. You need to use shorter answers. Cut back the clutter on the screen and make it intuitive. However, that can make it fairly unattractive on a PC screen unless you take quite a few extra steps and actions. Flag your data by device. So once your data comes in, just look at the answers from those people who did it on tablet, those who did it on mobile phone, and those who did it on PC. Are there any differences? If there are they just sample differences and you can deal with it with sample weighting? Or do you have some mode effects? Make sure that you flag the data so you can do the analysis. The best options are responsive designs. These are designs that actually look and see how big is the screen, how can I use that screen properly, that might ask you there's a slider on the PC screen but convert that to numbers typed in on a smartphone or a BlackBerry in particular. So those are the best tools. Have a look at the different software options from the different platforms. They're increasingly offering that. However, the software will not deal with the problems. If you ask questions that don't fit on the screen, if you have answer lists that don't fit on the screen, the software will allow the participant to scroll up and down and see it, but it's not good. You need to make sure that you're designing your surveys in terms of punchy questions, clear answers, intuitive processes so that they make sense. Here's a great example of more accurate information. It comes from NewMR. It's one of the cases that we quote in the Handbook of Mobile Market Research. They were doing a study, typical sort of question, how many boxes of cereals do you have at home? And the data just looked wrong. They'd got other data to work it with. They'd got some house audit data, and the numbers coming back were just too small. So, next step, can you please take a photograph of the cereals you've got at home? And then an intern, because this is one of the terrible things we ask interns to do, was then charged with adding up the number of cereal boxes. Guess what? People had a lot more cereal boxes at home than they were reporting when they were just typing in the numbers. They were forgetting some of the lesser brands, some of the brands that had been at the back of the cupboard a bit and hadn't been used as much. So we were all of a sudden, MMR were able to get more accurate information. At the moment, we don't have the technology to look at all those boxes of cereals and count them, so it was somebody doing it, which raises another of the challenges. Switching away from the world of quant to the world of qual, this is a quadrant that we've used in the book, we've used elsewhere, for the 4 types of use that people are making with mobile research in qualitative areas. So we can use it to connect from mobile. So an online focus group can be from a tablet, it can be from a smartphone. Online discussions and forums are from tablets and from smartphones. Depth interviews, online depth interviews, if you're using a variety of tools, or even if you're just using Skype or FaceTime, can be from these mobile devices. Insight communities, increasingly, people who take part in insight communities in MROCs are insisting on connecting via their mobile devices. We need to make sure that all of that is enabled. The next are conventional users of mobile, really. So in a face-to-face group, people are often using iPads to get people to do activities. They're setting homework, such as collecting photos from their kitchen to share in the group, communicating with the participants, telling them where the location of the focus group is, using mapping and GPS and all of these sorts of things. It's all playing part of the qual picture. Much more interesting are these things like the mobile diary. It's really brought the mobile diary to life. People are taking photographs. Navin Williams, who was a co-author of the book with us, talked about one study in India where people were taking pictures of their face and the products they were using when using a cream. They've been given the cream to use for about 2 to 3 weeks, a face cream, taking pictures of their face, taking pictures of the cream, recording their comments. We're seeing people using mobile phones in all sorts of ethnography, mobile ethnography, research, where we're getting participants to go out and collect information and to observe things, getting them to do mobile blogging. So all of this is great. It's really enriching what can be done. And finally, the cutting edge, sort of bleeding edge stuff is really what I would call on the shoulder research. So the quantified self, all these devices that people are using to collect their exercise and their patterns and their movements. Passive tracking, so we're recording what people are doing with their various mobile devices. Things like Google Glass and similar, recording what people are doing. A lot of people are going around carrying a camera like Memto around their neck, taking a picture every few seconds to build up this story. So we're getting this on the shoulder research. We see what the participants see and then we process it in conjunction with them. And one of the reasons why this is probably stronger in qual than quant is we don't have good automated tools yet. Some are on the way, but we don't have them really yet in the market research world for processing that richness of data. It's also brought up some interesting differences between qual and quant. And I really need to thank Melanie Courtwright and Jackie Lorch for stimulating this conversation as a part of the University of Georgia's program, because it used to be you could tell the difference between qual and quant by the type of data we collected. But that's no longer true, because quant is now collecting images, it's collecting videos, it's collecting a lot more open-ended information. The software used to distinguish it, but actually you can now use a lot of these software packages to do semi-structured interviews, to collect open-end and videos, or you can use them to collect surveys. So that is becoming less of a distinguishing point. The type of sample, well, actually, that is becoming very much more similar. A lot of qualitative research now is done around panels, customer lists, research communities. They're also used for quant, so those are not great distinguishers. Really, what distinguishes the two now is the type of analysis. If you are using machines to put values to things, algorithms, those algorithms can be as simple as counting, or they can be as complex as discrete choice analysis, then it's quantitative. But if you're relying on a human brain to interpret what they see, even if that goes on to produce some numbers, then we're talking about qualitative. That has implications for the sample size. Qualitative is not small because qualitative needs small data. The analytic process currently only works with small data. So that is why we end up with small sample sizes. So it hasn't changed the qual and quant picture, but it's changed the way that we define them in some ways. Masses and masses of features around the phone. What can we do with all of those aspects of the phone going forward? We can move into the area of passive data. Data that doesn't require the respondent to actively enter it. They should always consent to it. They should know what is being collected, but they don't have to remember to press a button or do something every 10 minutes, every 20 minutes, or whatever it is to enter this data. So we can collect the location that they're at, phone usage data, internet usage, movement, temperature, what the light is like. One of the surveys that lots and lots of people did as one of the early trial ones was, how often do you look at your phone? And it turns out we look at our phone hundreds of times a day, and they can do that by picking up the passive data from the phone, the movement, the proximity to the head, interactions with other people's phones and services. So there's a lot of stuff going on in there. It does require permission. Now this is just a couple of examples of passive data collected from the survey I was showing you earlier, which hopefully if you've not taken part you will do later. So what time did it start? How long was the survey? What device were you using? So the top one was somebody using a Windows NT computer. They were using a 32-bit Internet Explorer on a 64-bit machine. If we look down there, we see a lot of iPhones. We see some iPad, a Mac. Down at the bottom, Linux, Android, and that's a Samsung Galaxy. So we can see all of these devices. We can see the longitude and the latitude. Now that may have come from their IP address, or it may have come directly from the GPS of the phone, depending on how it was collected. So that's one sort of passive data. For any of you that run exercises or do various things, you'll be familiar with this sort of thing. This is Runkeeper. This was a run that I did last year, the Robin Hood Half Marathon. It collected where I was every moment of the just under 2 hours I ran around the course. To just over 2 hours I had it turned on. What did I run past? It identified shops and locations. It knows how much I ran up and downhill. It knows what speed that I ran. If I'd got my heart meter on, it would have known my heart rate during the whole of that process, and I could have entered my calorific intake as well. So all of this quantified self, this passive data collection, can provide an incredibly rich range of things for market researchers. One of those is geo. Now, geo tracking is interesting. We saw it there on the Runkeeper. It showed me all the routes round. It's great with small amounts of data. It's really quite hard work to use if you have large amounts of data. And there are only a few good cases in the market research world of geo-tracking data being used. Geofencing is a much bigger area and is potentially going to deliver some quicker wins. What is geofencing? You set a boundary around a location. So let's create a boundary around Starbucks. We're going to do that by putting an iBeacon inside. So we know if somebody enters or leaves that Starbucks. Then we can launch marketing information. We wouldn't because we're market researchers, but other people would. We could launch information, or we could launch a survey, or we could launch a qualitative exercise. So the geofence knows when somebody enters or when they leaves, and it can trigger that to create all sorts of things. And that is a lot of the excitement around things like iBeacons. A couple of interesting case studies here about things that are going on. So this is from Marketing Sciences and Tesco in the UK. It was presented at a NewMR event previously. Customer satisfaction, the best way to do customer satisfaction is as people leave the Tesco store. So this was a face-to-face study, 950 stores across the UK. 100 interviews every 2 weeks in every single store, so 50,000 interviews per week. This was conducted using tablets that were Wi-Fi and 3G enabled, and they were using the tablets to schedule the work, to help find the stores, to check the data was being collected at the right time, to update the instructions to the researchers. So this is what we call MCAPI, and it's one example of it from a relatively sophisticated market. Another great study, this was presented at 2013 NewMR event by Miguel Ramos, talking about how Heineken, wanted to do a trade census in Africa, multi-country, country. They use mobile phone in an app, the Confirm It Soda app, GPS location and tagging. They knew where their interviewers went. The interviewers then had surveys, they had tasks, they collected pictures, and they created this brilliant trade census of beer selling in Africa. So we can see MCAPI being used in developing markets, medium markets, mature markets. It's changing the nature of what's going on. In the moment is probably the hottest thing, I think, that's going on in mobile research. Collecting data when things happen, not relying on people's memory. Examples, when people are traveling, when they're shopping, when they're using a service. So we're going to illustrate that with an example from my friends at Vision Critical. Thank you for allowing us to use this one. A day in the life, trying to understand what people drink and when. So 400 consumers for a day, every time they had a drink, they just put their responses in, along with when, where, what else, who, and questions like that. The survey took about 90 seconds each time they had a drink. And what they were able to show is the sort of things you can't do with typical recall type studies. So here were people drinking coffee with a peak in the morning, and it was coming down as the day went on. Tea, after all, this is the UK, big peak in the morning, big peak in the early afternoon, and a bit of a decline. Fruit juice is not a great UK drink. We see a bit of fizzy drinks coming through. Energy drinks, it tends not to be when you go to the gym. It tends to be for a bit of a lift in the middle of the day. Okay, plenty of water being drunk, that's good and healthy. And then, yep, predictable. The alcohol comes in at about 3 p.m., 4 p.m. and just goes up and up and up. And this gives us access to so many more aspects of what people are doing, what else they might have done, and the sort of things that are great about it being market research. How did it make you feel? What were you thinking about it? What was it that stimulated you to buy that? Other examples from outside the market research. This is a great project that Flowmounder are doing, looking at the mobile phone data from the cell operators, from the people who provide the telephone service, to find out where do people travel, to try to make predictive maps about where Ebola might move next. What they're looking at, however, is journeys of more than 20 kilometers. I mentioned earlier that geolocation, geo-tracking data is quite hard to work with. So one of the things they've done to simplify it here is they've called anybody who hasn't moved 20 kilometers having not moved. At that point, it becomes simple enough to start to draw some real patterns to the information. Some of the slightly scary things going on around the world. This is Aberdeen in Scotland. They stationed Wi-Fi units around the city centre. As people moved around, the Wi-Fi on their phones tried to make contact with it, which identified the MAC address of the mobile phones. A little bit more tricky with the iPhones, really easy with the Androids. These were unique, but in theory anonymous. There is some dispute about how anonymous that turns out to be. If you keep tracking that somebody goes home and they're the only person who lives there, is it still anonymous, for example? They tracked the movements all around the shopping area. They obtained no permission for all that whatsoever because they said it was anonymous, so we don't need permission. And that's caused a certain amount of concern. Here's another one from the UK, from Huddersfield, the Kingsgate Shopping Centre. If we just follow through the purple Wi-Fi flowchart, if the Wi-Fi on your phone is switched on, you will be picked up and given a unique ID number. No consent, no taking part. You're then tracked as you move through the shopping centre. Stop for 5 minutes outside the clothes shop, browse the ground floor, stop for 1 hour at the cafe. If you sign up to their free Wi-Fi, which of course is promoted as free Wi-Fi, they will store your details, email, gender, age, in exchange for offers and info related to you. What might happen afterwards is that, just like retargeting on websites, you might receive offers by email, for example, for the shop you stopped at or for the cafe you visited. So we're getting this really big change in the nature of data that's being transacted and swapped around. A couple of quick things about where mobile is going. iBeacons and methods of locating people beyond just that. So we're talking about more and more things from the telcos, more and more types of devices. Embedding, Flurry is one of those names that you really should know. Yahoo bought it recently. They embed code in the apps. When you run the apps, it looks to see where you are geographically, what time of day it is, what else you've been doing on your phone. It sends that back to Flurry. Flurry can then market that to other people. Of course, you have agreed to it. It will be in the end user license agreement of that piece of software you downloaded, but you probably didn't read. More and more of the quantified self, what is the Apple Watch going to do for self-collecting data? And more of these devices are coming through, and innovations like Google Glass. So what can we learn from Google Glass? We know that it's been taken off the market. From a research point of view, it's hard to do mainstream research without good research-focused software. People did some great trials and initiatives, but it wasn't delivering value in most cases. Large amounts of video are too expensive to process. Generally speaking, the people who are asking participants to collect video are saying, please collect video. Can you do 4 or 5 a day, no more than 30 or 45 seconds? So we need to get into the next level of technology where we can automate that. Privacy concerns about third parties. So if I've got a Google Glass on and I'm walking around a store, I've given permission, but what about everybody I look at? Have they given permission to be involved in that data? If I do a mobile ethnography project with my smartphone, what about all the people I interact with? Have they given permission with the data? So that brings us to ethics. All the normal rules apply, even when they're not explicitly stated. We assume that you have read your national guidelines. We assume that you are familiar with the ICC SMR international guidelines as a starting point. In addition, safety. Make sure that somebody doing a mobile survey is not driving a car or using machinery. Informed consent. If you're going to be collecting things off their phones, tell people. So it's much easier to get consent than it is to get informed consent. And the more we move into these cutting edge areas about passive data, the more it will be difficult to get informed consent. Third-party information. Don't collect information about people's friends. Don't go rummaging through their contacts. It's certainly not ethical. In most cases, it's not legal. Restrictions. Don't encourage them to take photos in the immigration queue at the airport. Don't encourage them to take photos of some of their neighbours' children. There are all sorts of problems in those areas. In some countries, specific locations are prohibited for defence and security reasons. So again, we want to be thinking about those sorts of issues. So almost at the end now, you'll be glad to hear, but 7 key trends I'd suggest you look at. Smartphones. A few people need to worry about feature phones because that is still the majority in many countries. The world is going towards smartphones. Within 5 years, 70% of the world is going to have a smartphone connected with the internet, is my opinion. Tablets are pushing the PCs out. There isn't a long-term route for most of us down the PC route. There are going to be more and more and more sample sources available. This is getting easier and easier to do. Device agnostic is really what we're looking at doing so that respondents can make the choice. Research participants decide how they want to take part. Keep an eye on in the moment and participative research. These are probably the fastest, most exciting growing area within the research world. We're going to have to deal with large amounts of unstructured, quote, qualitative data. By qualitative, I mean photographs and movies and things like that. And we're going to have to tackle the privacy and ethical concerns. 7 things to keep an eye out that are coming on the scene. Voice recognition, like Siri, like Cortana. If people are speaking into their mobile phone and it's being recognized, that is better than recording it because it ends up as decision data. It can change the course of things. It's data that we know how to process. Web messaging, WhatsApp, WeChat, services like that are much bigger than SMS now. Researchers are not making enough use of those. We're going to see more and more location tools coming forward. We need to be looking at the alternatives. Biometrics, feedback from how people react when they see something, facial coding from their smartphone, analysis of their voice. Are they sounding excited, stressed, believing, not believing? Android, Google are talking about a panel of 1 billion people, Android users. That could be a real game changer in terms of sample. Passive media monitoring. People like Nielsen are beginning to use these more and more to collect all of the media that people are going. And this is all moving towards single source data, including a smartphone. So we know what people saw, what they did on social media, what they bought, how they bought it, and when they consumed it. And that is going to be a fascinating world for researchers to work in. Finding out more about mobile, well, obviously I'm going to encourage you to buy the book. The UK, Amazon.co.uk, have got a great offer at the moment. It's only 10 quid, somewhat more expensive on some of the other Amazons. The University of Georgia got a fantastic course. I think it's fantastic because I was good. Go to their website, visit this site, and as of this month, we have new updated content, and the textbook for the course is the Handbook of Mobile Market Research. Also, have a look around for reports. So Focus Vision have just bought Decipher, and they've released edition 3 of the Decipher report based on millions of survey responses. People like Leslie Townsend at Kinesis release information based on hundreds of thousands and millions of survey responses talking about what people are actually doing with online surveys. Go to people like SMR to get the guidelines. IIX conferences have got some great stuff about mobile. MRMW from Merlion, some great stuff about mobile. The Mobile Marketing Research Association, again, it's got some good guidelines, some good information. And there are plenty of past recordings on the NewMR website of people talking about case studies, about examples, or about the overall picture. So just to finish with that big picture, mobile is here, it's already big, and companies really don't get to tell participants what to use. If it doesn't work on mobile, you probably shouldn't be doing it. Check everything on your mobile phone. If it's too hard and pleasant for you, it's too hard and pleasant to use. Before 2020, a majority of surveys will be completed via mobile, so embrace it now. Researchers tend to use apps when they have to. Otherwise, they're using browsers. That means apps are going to grow and grow because most of the exciting stuff we want to do actually depends on apps. It's easier to persuade people to download apps if you've got a relationship with them. So if they are your customers, or you're a panel owner, or you have a community with them, it's much easier to persuade people to download those. Most of the exciting location-based work at the moment is not research, it is marketing. Some of the things they do is kind of worrying, but there is a fantastic range of stuff being done by the marketers. We should look at the technologies and borrow the technologies, if not necessarily the ethics. Swing in mobile is designing the right questions. It's not about having the cleverest technology. The biggest problem we're going to face will be ethics. It will not be technology. So with that, I'd like to say thank you very much for joining me today.